Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupakadamayam Dadhati Swapadantikam Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhyarevacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. O Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. O Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. O Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Yo dushtyajan kshiti sut. Oh, that's not it. Yo dushtyajan kshiti sutta sajanarta dharan. Prartyam shriyam suravarai sadayavalokam. Naishchandripas taruchita marata madhuvet. Madhuvet. Seva nurakta manasam abhavopi palghu. Yudhishthajam Chitisutta Najanatadaram Pratyam Shriyam Suravara Sanayavalokam Madhuvet Sevanurakta Manasam Bhavo Pipalgu. Yudhishthajam Chitisutta Najanatadaram Pratyam Shriyam Suravara Sanayavalokam. Mothers, Nishtajam Kshitisutta Sajanastadaram Janavasarichitam Maratam Madhuvet Sanuraktam Manasam Bhavo Pibhago. Nishtajam Kshitisutta Sajanastadaram Pratyam Sriyam Survara Sadayavalokam. Yaha Hu Dustyajan, very difficult to give up. Kriti, the earth. Sutta, children. Swajana Artadharan, relatives, riches, and a beautiful wife. Pratyam, desirable. Shriyam, the goddess of fortune. Suravarai, by the best of the demigods. Sadaya Avalokam, whose merciful glance. Not. Aichat, desired. Nripa, the king. Tat Uchitam, this is quite befitting him. Mahatam, of great personalities. Mahatmas. Madhudvit, of Lord Krishna, who killed the demon Madhu. Seva Anurakta, attracted by the loving service. Manasam, of those whose minds. Abhava api, even the position of liberation. Palgu, insignificant. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation, Shukadeva Goswami continued, my dear king, the activities of Bharata Maharaj are wonderful. He gave up everything difficult for others to give up. He gave up his kingdom, his wife, and his family. His opulence was so great that even the demigods envied it, yet he gave it up. It was quite befitting a great personality like him to be a great devotee. He could renounce everything because he was so attracted to the beauty, opulence, reputation, knowledge, strength, and renunciation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Krishna is so attractive that one can give up all desirable things for his sake. Indeed, even liberation is considered insignificant for those whose minds are attracted to the loving service of the Lord. The purport. This verse confirms Krishna's all-attractiveness. Maharaj Bharata was so attracted to Krishna that he gave up all his material possessions. Generally, materialistic people are attracted by such possessions. Ato griha kshetra sutapta vitair janasya mohoyam aham mimeti. Quote, one becomes attracted to his body, home, property, children, relatives, and wealth. In this way, one increases life's illusions and thinks in terms of I and mine. End quote. The attraction for material things is certainly due to illusion. There is no value and attraction to material things, for the conditioned soul is diverted by them. One's life is successful if he is absorbed in the attraction of Krishna's strength, beauty, and pastimes, as described in the 10th canto Srimad Bhagavatam. The Mayavadis are attracted to merging into the existence of the Lord, but Krishna is more attractive than the desire to merge. The word abhava means, quote, not to take birth again in this material world, end quote. A devotee doesn't care whether he is going to be reborn or not. He is simply satisfied with the Lord's service in any condition. That is real mukti. Iha yasya haredhasye karmana manasa gira nikila swapyavasta su jivan mukta so uchate. Quote, one who acts to serve Krishna with his body, mind, intelligence, and words is a liberated person, even within this material world. A person who always desires to serve Krishna is interested in ways to convince people that there is a Supreme Personality of Godhead and that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is Krishna. That is his ambition. It doesn't matter whether he is in heaven or in hell. This is called Uttama Shloka Lalasa. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. So this is a description of Bharata Maharaj. Shukadev Goswami is glorifying the exalted devotion of Bharata Maharaj. So in this glorification of Bharata Maharaj, it is being mentioned that he was able to give up something that's very difficult to give up. Dustyajan means very difficult to give up. And what is that thing that is very difficult to give up? Kriti Sutta Sojanartha Dharan. It's translated earth, children, relatives, riches, and a beautiful wife. On account of these attachments, one is steeped deep into the tar pit of illusion. Ato griha kshetra sutapta vitayar janasya mohoya mohamameti. By having these things, one expands the tar pit of illusion, that this I am this body and that these things are mine. Although these are the sources of misery and bondage, still the living entity cannot give them up. It is like this description I'm about to use is actually a description of love of God, but it works in this context also. It's like hot sugarcane juice. Hot sugarcane juice, because of its sweet taste, you don't want to give it up. But when you drink it, it burns your tongue, apparently. This actually is a description to describe the way prema works. But it fits here also. That although these things are sources of misery and great bondage, one cannot give them up. It's just like sweet sugarcane juice. Although it's burning your tongue, you cannot stop drinking it because of the sweet taste. Actually, these things don't have any sweetness, but due to the illusion, one imagines them to be sweet. Even though he is practically experiencing misery by his attachment to these things, still somehow he's not able to give it up. That is due to the great influence of illusion. That's what Prabhupada says here. These attractions to material things has no value because it simply diverts one's energy. That's true even materially speaking. To be attached to such material things diverts one's energy, even materially speaking, what to speak, diverting one from the goal of spiritual life. Oftentimes when young men have girlfriends or vice versa, then they're not able to concentrate on important things like their studies, and all that becomes completely insignificant on account of their infatuation with one another. So these things are quite distracting or diverting, is the language Prabhupada uses. Even materially speaking, what to speak of spiritually speaking, it completely diverts one's energy from the goal of spiritual life. And yet, even for learned persons, it's hard to give up these things. The Bhagavatam mentions this many times in many places, that even for persons who are learned, they also find themselves attached to such attractions. Because getting out of it is not a matter of being learned, it's a matter of surrender to Krishna. Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Daivesha gunamaya mamamaya dharatya mameva ye prapadyante mayami tam tarantite. He says that these illusions are, practically speaking, they're insurmountable, dharatya, and that the only way one could actually surmount them is by surrender unto him. Mameva ye prapadyante mayami tam tarantite. He doesn't say by knowledge, but rather by surrender to him you can surmount. So therefore it is not surprising, although we do generally tend to get astonished when we see learned personalities becoming influenced by Maya, we tend to get very astonished and we feel shocked and bewildered, and we might even write an article about it and try to get it published on Dandavats, and if Dandavats doesn't accept it, certainly Chakra will accept it and other such sites. We tend to get bewildered like that, but actually it is not surprising. According to the Bhagavatam, even for learned persons to become illusioned is not outside of the norm. What is outside of the norm is someone can be very surrendered to Krishna and thus surmount the illusions. We actually heard so many verses about that, how even great Raja Rishis cannot get out of the influence of I and mine, because it is very hard for persons to actually surrender to Krishna and get the gift of bhakti, which allows them to actually get out of the clutches of material energy. So there's no reason to be shocked to see learned persons getting bewildered. That is quite normal, actually. And of course, we have standards within an institution by which we have to see to it that the standard is maintained. That keeps us credible to society. But on an individual basis, devotees shouldn't be shocked because surrender to Krishna is quite extraordinary. It's not an ordinary thing to give oneself completely to the Supreme Lord. So then this is being described here that these things which are this illusion, which is very difficult to surmount, was easily surmounted by Bharata Maharaj. As would be expected, it is mentioned here, as would be expected because he was Mahatma, he was a great soul. Mahatma means Mahatmanas tumam partha, Daivyam pakritam ashritaha. Vajanti nan manaso. You know this verse, right? Bhagavad Gita. Did you take your Bhakti Shastri yet? I'm sure this is one of the verses you should have to know for Bhakti Shastri. This verse says that the Mahatmas are nourished by the internal energy of Krishna, Daivi Prakriti. This Daivi Prakriti is none other than Srimati Radharani, according to Srila Prabhupada in OI. So one who is a Mahatma is nourished by Srimati Radharani. Of course, the nature of Srimati Radharani is she's got her eyes on Krishna only. So anyone who's nourished by that energy, they got their eyes only on Krishna. They're attracted to the beauty of Krishna. So this was being mentioned here. That is not surprising that for such a great soul that they could surmount illusion like this, because they're so intensely attracted to the beauty of Krishna. Prabhupada mentions all the 6 opulences of Bhagavan. But of these 6 opulences of Bhagavan, beauty is considered to be the body, and the other opulences are considered to be like the limbs. So just as the limbs rest on the body, so the other opulences of Bhagavan rest on his beauty. It is the beauty that is the main feature of the personality of Godhead. And it is this beauty that attracts all entities toward it. In the material world, beauty is seen as something to be exploited, generally. That's the idea. But in the spiritual world, in the spiritual concept of things, beauty is actually the exploiter. Beauty is the controller, and beauty is the controller. And such as beauty is that it draws all entities toward it. There's an imperishable attraction to the beauty of Krishna that inspires loving service toward him. So that's mentioned here also as Seva Anurakta Manasam. The nature of love of God is the primary feature of love of God is Seva. The loving responsiveness with one's body, words, and minds to Krishna. That's what Seva means. Loving responsiveness to Krishna with one's body, mind, and words. So Seva Anurakta Manasam, their minds are completely attracted to the services of Krishna. It's an imperishable desire to serve Krishna. Nothing can destroy such a desire. That is mentioned by Krishna also in the Bhagavad Gita. Today a lot of Bhagavad Gita verses coming up. Raja Vidya, Raja Guhyam, Pavitram. Pavitram? Evam. Uttamam Pratyaksha Avagamam Daryam Susukam Kartum. Avyayam is what? Imperishable, as I'm describing. This is a verse describing bhakti in the Bhagavad Gita. The most confidential knowledge of the Bhagavad Gita is the nature of devotion to God. That's the most confidential knowledge. So Krishna speaks of this knowledge in verse 2 by glorifying as the king of knowledge, as the most confidential, as the supremely pure. Susukam Kartum, Pratyaksha Bhakti gives perception of the beauty of Krishna. So right now we may say, well, if Krishna is so beautiful, why am I not attracted? Because our devotion has not fructified to such an extent by which we're actually perceiving in truth the beauty of Krishna in its full opulence. And therefore we might got our eyes on Maya, and we got, at least our head is turning towards Krishna, hopefully. But our eyes might be firmly fixed on Maya. But when you're invested with Bhakti Shakti, the spiritual potency of Krishna, as is extending from Srimati Radharani, Daivi Prakriti, then Pratyaksha Avagamam Daryam, it grants vision of Krishna directly. It is a supreme dharma, and it is full of joy. Bhakti is Kevala Nanda Kanda, is executed joyfully. Generally, the idea of service in the mature world is something synonymous with slavery. So when you use the word service, people don't usually feel a little bit, unattracted or disgusted. But service in the spiritual concept is fully blissful. Susukam, it is not only happy, but su means to the superlative degree, full of joy. On Saturday and Sunday we had some girls come from Northwestern University who's coming to our club. And one of the girls that came yesterday, she's very nice and she's like super inquisitive. She just has like a barrage of questions. She just like opened the floodgates of unlimited questions. And they're very intelligent questions also because she spent 1 year in Egypt, which is a Muslim regime. That's not a nice word to use. Country. That's so when she was there in Egypt, they were trying to tell her it was her destiny to be Muslim and all these things, and she wasn't convinced. But what it did, it prompted her to become super inquisitive about spiritual life and the nature of truth. So she had a lot of questions for me also. Anyway, last night she came, and she was asking why this tradition as opposed to another tradition. And after the Damodar Rashtakam yesterday, the devotees were like wild during the Damodar Rashtakam, especially toward the end. There was just like a wild party. And those girls, they were dancing like mad women. I'm sure Krishna was the head of the party because she's got powerful enthusiasm that's quite contagious. And they were her friends also. They've been friends with her. Well, at least one of them, the girl I'm talking about, was friends with her since freshman year. And they were dancing like so ecstatically yesterday. I happened just to look over to see how they were participating in the kirtan. And they were wild. I mean, hair was flying, limbs were flying. And so then I thought, this is the answer. Why devotional service as opposed to other things? This is the answer. Because it's Kevala Ananda. It is so joyful. What other answer could you be looking for? So they said, why this tradition? Just bring them to a kirtan like that. This is the answer. It is fully joyful. And that's also the nature of the spiritual world. It is full of joy. And it's susukam kartum avyayam, and it's imperishable. The attraction to Krishna cannot be perished by anything. So much so, as it's being described here, even if one goes to hell, the desire to serve Krishna is so powerful, it cannot be destroyed there. Even the desire for liberation, which is very attractive for most living entities, becomes totally unattractive for a person who's imbued with bhakti. So how is it that Bharata Maharaj is able to give us something so powerful, such a powerful illusion, like wife or girlfriend or money and possessions, because he had bhakti. In the nature of bhakti, seva anurakta manasam, it draws the mind towards Krishna. Actually, the interesting thing about bhakti, these girls, there was two of them that came yesterday, they were quite bewildered by the presentation because they came straight into an esoteric topic, the nature of Krishna's exchange with his devotees, which is the most confidential knowledge. So they were obviously quite bewildered by the presentation. God is running away from his mother and he's upset with her because she wouldn't give the breast milk. And that's bewildering on one level, but the other bewildering thing is that we all believe it. That is more bewildering. We're all like Jai, Haribo, and cheering on and everything. So they were quite confused. So I tried to pacify their confusion because they're students, and generally any soul in the Kali Yuga, especially also those who are in academics, they want to understand things logically. There should be appeal to the intelligence. So how to describe Krishna's pastimes with the residents of Braja in a way that it appeals to the intelligence? Anyway, it's very difficult, but what we try to explain is what I'll try to explain now. What is the nature of bhakti or seva? Bhakti is very powerful that, as I've just described, it draws the living entity towards Krishna. But more amazing than that is that it draws Krishna towards a living entity. The nature of love is that it draws living entities toward one another, despite the incompatibility. Sometimes you may have this experience either personally or vicariously of seeing a couple that was attracted to each other and looks totally incompatible. I remember seeing on the news. I go to the news to find interesting things sometimes, and there was one girl. She was quite big, and her boyfriend was really skinny, and he looked kind of like what they would call a stud. And so people would write on her blog really malicious things because of the incompatibility of the relationship. And yet, because there's love, this is of course in the perverted sense, but it works out even in the perverted sense. Because there's love, even in two entities that are totally incompatible are fully attracted to each other. So similarly, the relationship between God and living entity is actually completely incompatible, because God is all pervading, all powerful, all knowing, and the entity is like this insignificant, smaller than the atom. How is that? That's very incompatible. This huge entity, I mean, as you would expect of an all-pervasive personality, and then tiny entity. How is it that their relationship is actually compatible, but incompatible? But the nature of bhakti is that it can draw incompatible entities to one another. That's the nature of love. Just a fraction of the potency of Srimati Radharani can draw Krishna toward the minute living entity. So that's amazing. That's one point. And then the other point is that anything that gives us pleasure, we become attached to that. And anything that we're attached to, we're controlled by that, isn't it? I'm sure, have this experience in loving relationships and so on. Loving relationships means outside the spiritual context. We have this experience that anything that gives us pleasure, we're attached to. Anything that we're attached to, we're controlled by that, isn't it? So the nature of love is that, again, the nature of love is seva, or using all one's energy for the beloved. So that means one is existing entirely for the pleasure of the beloved. So it is not surprising that the Supreme Lord will become attached to such a living entity and also controlled by such a living entity. In fact, that's the description of bhava and prema, is that Krishna becomes controlled by them, even at the stage of bhava, and all the more so at the stage of prema, he's controlled. Why? Because the entity endowed with the potency of Radha, which is the Hladini Shakti. Hladini Shakti means what? Existing for the pleasure of Krishna. So naturally, because it's giving pleasure to Krishna entirely, then naturally the Lord becomes attached to such a person and ultimately controlled by them. And of course, the converse is true. So Krishna also exists entirely for the pleasure of the living entities that he's having loving exchanges with. And so naturally, they become controlled by him. So this is the mysterious nature of devotion to God. It's quite unique to our tradition that we say the goal of life is not God, but rather love of God. That's unique. Because of course, love has only Krishna as the object, and naturally, again, as I'm saying, it draws Krishna toward the entity. So then when we're hearing about these wonderful pastimes of Krishna, we were trying to describe to these students, I said, when you see an incompatible relationship in this way, then for a third party looking at it, it's inconceivable. Actually, it's beyond their ability to understand, and also generally beyond their ability to appreciate. So same example, the fat girl and the skinny guy. So she would get a lot of vicious statements on her blog. I'm not going to repeat them, but there would be like really vicious statements. She was sharing some of them, very heavy, very vicious statements. People could not understand how they could be such an attraction, nor could they appreciate. So similarly, I said, imagine you have a whole kingdom like this, a kingdom of love. That's Braja. Braja is the kingdom of love. A whole realm like that, then practically everything about it would be incomprehensible and generally beyond our ability to fully appreciate unless we were able to step inside that experience. And I gave the example of taking psychedelic drugs. Other reason I gave that example because my brother had shared something to me without, I hope this doesn't mind, but one personality was sharing, when they took a psychedelic drug, it looked like the chair was growing. So that's a little far out, so they kind of like freaked out a little bit. You can imagine if the chair starts growing, you kind of freak out. Now, if they start telling you that, how would you be able to understand that? Unless you were able to step inside that experience by adopting the methodology of using LSD or something like that to get that experience. It just seems like something very far out. The chair grew after I took this. That's very far out. And the only way a person could really appreciate it is if they stepped inside that experience themselves. And the only way they could do that is by using the methodology by which they get inside that experience, namely in this case LSD. We're not recommending doing LSD to get the experience of watching the chair grow. But the principle is that when you're hearing about the realm of God, are these things true? Do you believe these stories are true, or are they just messages? That was the question to me. Are they just like nice, colorful stories with messages, or are they actually true? And anyway, in short, we accept them to be true. These are true experiences of great personalities who are envisioning these things. It's just as far out as saying that the chair grew by taking a psychedelic drug in one sense. So this is a true experience, and the reason I tend to think that it's true as the verse not being true is because the lies and also the message of these personalities speak so profoundly to me that I don't take it that they're charlatans, just trying to pull a hoax on everyone, especially when there's a whole lineage of them from dating back up to 500 years ago, at least in our Gaudiya Sampradaya, and even thousands of years before that. So I don't take it that they're charlatans just trying to pull a big one on us. And therefore, they might be conveying a genuine experience, but how would I be able to understand that unless I stepped inside that world to get that experience myself? It's just like, and they were eating prasadam. I said, just like if you try to convey your experience of eating prasadam, how could you do it? It is very challenging to convey an experience to anyone. You can use words to indicate something. It's good, it's salty, but that doesn't really tell me what you're experiencing. And it hardly tells me what you're experiencing, in fact. So the only way I could really begin to understand what you might be experiencing is by getting a plate of prasadam myself and tasting it for myself. So similarly, are these things true? Of course we accept them to be true. These are the true experiences of great personalities who aren't charlatans, at least by dint of their life. We can hardly think that they're cheating us. And their message is quite profound. So then it's a powerful experience, but you have to step inside that experience to understand it, truly. And in order to do that, you would have to adopt the methodology used to get inside that experience. And that methodology, of course, is bhakti or bhakti yoga. So bhakti yoga is completely amazing that although so many amazing things he had in terms of the material sense, he was able to immediately give it up. And it's not that it was challenging, but rather due to the higher attraction to the beauty of Krishna, that a living is able to do that. Therefore, when they hear the pastimes of the gopis, for example, how the gopis left everything immediately upon hearing the flute, Krishna's call for them, then many will not be able to appreciate that. Because you can only appreciate that by being endowed with love yourself, prema bhakti. And so that, of course, that gift is not so easily available. Because ultimately, it's coming from Krishna. That's why we say love of God. So out of Krishna's treasure chest, this one he doesn't agree to give so easily. He has a big treasure chest of goodies. Artha, you want artha? Okay, here's some artha. You want kama? Here's some kama. You want moksha? Okay, take moksha also. Bhakti? Oh, I don't know about that one. That's my special treasure. He doesn't want to give that one so easy. There's a nice verse. Actually, it comes earlier on in this 5th canto. Rajan patir guru ralam bhavatam yadhunam. You know this verse? Daivam priya kulapati kwachakin korova. You know this verse? Oh, I turn right here. Astvevam anga bhagavan bhajatam mukunda muktim dadati karichis manabhakti yogam. You know this verse? It comes from the Nectar of Devotion, Bhakti Yoga, Bhakti Shastri. They might want you to know this one. You know? It describes one of the 6 characteristics of Krishna. It's a description of Sudurlabham. One of the 6 characteristics of Krishna is that it's very rarely obtained, right? And the verse that is quoted to confirm that is this verse. What does it say? It's a verse where Shukadeva Goswami glorifies Parikshit Maharaj. And he glorifies, actually, again, a glorification of his devotion of the Pandavas. Actually, it's a glorification of the devotion of the Pandavas. He wanted to glorify the dynasty in which Parikshit Maharaj appears in, because he just heard about this awesome dynasty, Priyavrata. So in order to encourage him that you also come from a great dynasty, he glorifies the position of the Pandavas. And in this verse, it explains very nicely the relationship that Krishna had with the Pandavas. It says that Krishna was their maintainer, Patir, he was their guru, he was their worshipable deity, Daivam. Priya, he was their dearmost friend. Kulapati, he was the leader of the dynasty. And a very extraordinary thing is then told, Kwacha Kinkarova. And then sometimes Krishna even took the position of a Kinkara in relationship to translated as a messenger, like a menial servant. He would sometimes take that position in relationship to the Pandavas, just like we've heard many times that when Krishna introduces himself to the readers in the Gita and also in the Bhagavatam, he introduces himself as the chariot driver of Arjuna. And the chariot driver is considered like a Shudra's position. It's a low class, lower caste, not class, but a lower caste position. And that's how Krishna chooses to introduce himself to the readers. Kinkarova, he takes the position of a menial servant. That's the extraordinary nature of bhakti to Krishna, that it subordinates Krishna in such a way. Astvevam anga Bhagavan bhajatam mukundo. So if those persons who worship Krishna, they do bhajan to try to get Krishna's grace, mukti dadati, he very easily will give them mukti. Even mukti can refer to the Vaishnava liberations also, not just to merging. He will give that one. But kariche smana bhakti yogam, but he's very particular about giving bhakti to anyone. Why? As we already discussed, he comes controlled by that. So that you want karma, take karma. You want some money, take it. You want a woman, take her. You want some opulence, take it. You want a house, take it. You want mukti, all right, I'll give that also, no problem. You want bhakti? I don't know about that one. Because you'll be able to control me. I don't know about that. So it is described, of course, Krishna, he does want to give it. There's no doubt about that. But he's particular. He's a little particular. And therefore, although when he descended to the earth planet, he came with the treasure house, the storehouse of love of Godhead, many of those jewels didn't get distributed. So then Gaur Lila becomes becomes our access to such a treasure. Because Mahaprabhu is described, he broke open the storehouse of love of Godhead, and he freely distributed those fruits without discrimination, provided all we have to do is receive it. Constitutionally, the living entity is built only to be a recipient of grace by constitution. He can't force anything, in fact. So that's his constitutional position. So Mahaprabhu broke open the storehouse of the treasure of bhakti, and he's, of course, freely distributing, provided we keep our arms open. Of course, even if we don't, then Gora or his associates, they figure out a way to force us to take such a treasure, which is such a wonderful treasure that the things that are most bewildering to us and that keeps us bound up in that illusory energy, very difficult to overcome, can easily become overcome by the nature of the heavy, imperishable attraction to the beauty of Krishna. Seva Anurakta Manasam. So this is some nice verse here glorifying devotional service, Bhakti Tattva. Yeah.
Thank you, Guru. Hare Krishna. I was hoping you could shed a little bit of light on the role of renunciation in augmenting devotion.
Our renunciation is Yukta Vairagya. So
I'm thinking like because we hear in relation not austerity. It's not like renunciation for the purpose of making spiritual advancement, but I'm speaking about renunciation in a relationship with Krishna, like the mood of being renounced. Like Krishna, we hear is supremely renounced. That's one of his opulences. So not that he is demanding anything from us. And then also we hear about the devotees, like the last verse of the Shikshastakam, there's a mood of renunciation there, I think. Whatever you may. So I'm just trying to understand that more clearly.
I wouldn't describe that as a mood of renunciation, as a mood of devotion to Krishna, which has renunciation as a corollary quality. Vasudeve Bhagavati Bhakti Yoga Prayojitaha Janayati Ashu Vairagyam Jnanam Chayara Hetukam. That Vairagya and Jnanam follow pure devotion to Krishna. So you can say that this is an element of those who have devotion to Krishna, just like Bhava. We're hearing about the Bhav Prema, and we're hearing about that in today's purport. And what is the quality of Bhava? One of the 9 essential symptoms of Bhava is Virakti. So it manifests on account of having Bhava, not the other way around as such. In fact, in one essay that, well, it's not essay, it's part of Chaitanya Shikshamrita, Bhaktivinoda Thakur mentioning about taking Babaji Vesh, particularly renunciation, and particularly Babaji Vesh, that one should not dare do such a thing until he has Baba, because only by Baba he would have true renunciation from matter and so on. So I guess one could describe it as a mood of renunciation. There is a verse in the 6th chapter of the Anchalila glorifying the associates of Mahaprabhu, and the verse says that renunciation is the wealth of the followers of Lord Chaitanya. It is mentioned like that in the Anchalila, a chapter talking about Raghunath Das Goswami. But that's just describing a feature of their intense devotion to Krishna. Just like the gopis are supremely renounced, but I don't know how much is there a mood of renunciation as there is a mood of intense attraction to the beauty of Krishna, as we were describing today. This renunciation manifests as a feature of real love of God. Now, for practitioner devotees like us who are yet to maybe gain the full-blown reality of devotion to Krishna, then the mood is also similar. It is a mood of devotion to Guru, to Krishna, like that. And the renunciation that we practice, as I was mentioning, is called Yukta Vairagya. It's the only form of renunciation that can help nourish our step-by-step progress towards Krishna. Any other form of renunciation will cause the heart to grow hard. Rupa Goswami spends some short time describing that also in the Bhakti-rasamrita Sindhu. So Yukta Vairagya is the best form of renunciation because it's linked not so much to the idea of renunciation, but to the idea of the service of Krishna. Because you're seeing the whole reality as paraphernalia meant for the pleasure of God. So therefore, your mood toward it is renounced in the sense that you don't see it in terms of your own enjoyment. But your relationship with it is very engaged because you see it as paraphernalia for Krishna's pleasure. And where you don't see that, then you don't use those particular things. And so that nourishes a devotional concept. So I guess you could describe it as a mood of renunciation. That might be one way of describing it. But it seems that it's based more on a devotional, an intense devotional attraction that is gifted from the spiritual master uh, for the personality of Godhead. Okay.
But I poorly phrased it. Um, what I am really trying to understand more thoroughly is how we see this symptoms of detachment or a mood of detachment in these loving exchanges when the symptom of love is actually intense attachment.
Where you're speaking about the relationship with the devotees,
That's right.
that is also a feature of love. Because in order for there to be the freedom, the free expression of the beloved in the relationship, you have to be detached. Otherwise, you arrest them in their ability to actually express their selves fully. Therefore, the devotion of the residents of Braja is topmost, because they're completely detached in that sense, giving Krishna the freedom of expression of his loving attraction. Sometimes Krishna wants to go and court some other gopi, and Srimati Radharani thinks, this is described in Anchalila chapter 20, I'll go to that gopi and bring her to Krishna. In other words, I mean, that's obviously highly esoteric subject matter, but the principle is that in order to give the beloved freedom of expression, then there has to be detachment. Otherwise, you arrest them. We'll bring it down to a more practical level, like when parents and their children. they say that they love their children so much, and as they do in a conventional sense. We won't doubt that, but generally their love is based on an illusory attachment also, an expanded self-egoistic concept, which is expanded into their child, and they're attached. And as such, they arrest their children's growth. Oftentimes, it is the case. They don't give their children the freedom to express themselves. Their child wants to go in this direction. Parent says, no, you got to move this direction. Child wants to marry this person. No, you got to marry this person, especially in Indian families. And so in that way, their so-called love arrests the beloved's ability to express themselves. And then naturally in such relationships, they don't work out for very long. And then there's full detachment. After a certain point, I don't want to see your face anymore. I'm through with you. So in order to give freedom of range in loving dealings, there has to be the element of detachment there. Otherwise, you don't get the beauty of the exchange as is seen in the Lord's pastimes. Okay, yeah, and then there's not a problem. I was gonna comment on this also.
In attempting to share Krishna consciousness with others,
Oh yeah, I forgot to mention that point. Anyway,
how does, because on the one hand, there is the desire, hopefully, even we're praying sometimes to Krishna, let this person become a devotee. But, so then there may be like some, even like guidance, they're coming asking questions, so then giving some suggestion in terms of this is the philosophy, this is things you can practice. How do we assure that that is not this inhibiting type thing that you were mentioning, which is not loving but actually exploitation?
well, to assure, you have to be fully attached to Guru and Krishna. And without that insurance, then there's a good chance that the material, because it's always nice someone's listening to us, someone's following our advice, we got followers, it feels good. That's definitely creeps in. That's conditioned life in a nutshell. Pratishta comes up. So unless we're fully attached to the services of our spiritual master and Krishna, then I don't know if there's any better insurance than that. It's not that you can look out for it as such, because the subtlety of it is that you don't perceive it, and that's how we get caught. So if we want full insurance, I guess we have to become fully attached to Guru and Krishna. That's the only full insurance in terms of that. And by such attachment, you're always thinking in terms of expanding Krishna's family. So then, and you're working with that kind of concept. There's no question of you know, inhibiting them and so on. You're just thinking of ways to, and Krishna, of course, by such attachment, you get spiritual inspiration. When you're working on the platform of Pratishta, there's no spiritual inspiration because you're figuring out ways to manipulate for your own pleasure. But if there's Krishna consciousness, then there's the inspiration of Krishna running through you to help give proper guidance to those who would see you in that manner as such. So I don't know. That seems to me that might be the only insurance. Otherwise, there's every chance of getting caught, as we are conditioned souls after all. So your other question is now probably going to comment something.
Three things. One is I wanted to express my appreciation. This class was very helpful for me. Uh, on the last line that you were explaining, Sevanurakta Manasam. Thank you. Dr. Luke's question about attachment or renunciation. Generally, we don't use language of renunciation in a relationship. But we generally use the words conditional or unconditional. Because where there is attachment, there are conditions for the relationship to continue. And when there is detachment, there are no conditions. So unconditional versus conditional has a more relational connotation that makes things clearer. versus renunciation or abnegation or detachment have a sense of separating a person. But when you say unconditional, it still connotates that the person is in the relationship. And the conditions come because of attachment, as he was expressing. And we're not aware of our attachments because we live on a, there are very things happening in the subconscious, cheta, that make us put conditions in relationships. The residents of Vraja, they were free from bodily conception completely, so there were no conditions. So 8th verse of Sikshashtaka talks about that stage where there are no conditions. The point about students asking whether this is a nice story or, and you explained it wonderfully. That was also very helpful. And that took me to, we've been studying Ishopanishad, where there's Vidya and Avidya discussion. And Bhaktivinoda Thakur, Prabhupada quotes Bhaktivinoda Thakur quite a lot on that purport, and how he is very heavy about this is all the slaughterhouse education. And the part of the slaughterhouse education is it disconnects the mind or intelligence from the heart completely. Previous Vedic education is where the heart's very much included in the educational system. Love for the teacher, doing things with gratitude. So the messages are experiential. Nowadays, education is disconnected. Everything is objective. There's no faith in the teacher. This challenging attitude. And everything has to be rationally understood. That's part of modern science. It has to be rational. And love is not rational. That's what he was explaining nicely. Big girl and a skinny stud. It's not rational. Or you know, man puts all his affection into a dog or a cat and puts on a sweater for the dog and you know, sings on Greenleaf and Ravenswood, where the station is. There's a place called Bark Place. Bark Place. It's a place for dogs, and they advertise where dogs can stay, eat, and whatever. I don't not mate, but whatever, something. And they take dogs for walks. They have TV programs for dogs. It's not rational. But why does like a dog will understand the news? Here's the new Bark news. You know what's going on. It's not rational, irrational in that sense. But love, it doesn't fit that. So that educational system, that was the point I was appreciating, that it separates the heart completely from anything else, from the teacher, from the messages. And so they have to learn things like this is how Newtonian laws work. This is how, when you add this chemical into that thing, it all.
That's a very nice explanation. Okay, then. Are there anything else anyone wants to say? No. Okay. Thank you very much. Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Should be a little conscious.